As efforts to clean up the city and country intensify, new litter prevention regulations became effective on March 1, 2014, paving the way for more stringent measures to be taken against those guilty of littering. Implementation of the new regulations will see steps being taken to engage the public and encourage a change in behavior. This week on El Dorado Shines, we will tell you more about the new regulations and the penalties for littering, which now include more hefty fines and even jail time for some offenses.
We must do everything we can to keep our surroundings clean.
Stop littering. Do the right thing.
The EPA has moved into the phase of implementing the litter prevention regulations as of March 1st. Prior to that, we've had several discussions with key stakeholders to start testing the enforcement aspects in the city of Georgetown. And this primarily was with the Georgetown Mayor and City Council, particularly the town clerk, the solid waste manager, and the city constabulary. Discussions were engaged in focusing on the aspects of implementation, providing capacity building for the current officers of the city constabulary, and providing them the full powers of a litter warden under the current litter prevention regulations. So that those powers and those responsibility will be given to the city constabulary officers.
The regulations make provision for the creation of the office of a litter warden. These wardens are actually the individuals who will be on the ground policing and enforcing the provisions of the regulation. According to the regulations, there are two categories of persons who can be considered as litter wardens. There are those persons who are specifically recruited by the agency to fulfill that position, and then there are also persons who, by virtue of the office that they hold, they're by default considered to be litter wardens. And in this category, that would include all officers of the Environmental Protection Agency, all mining officers, all forestry officers, all public health inspectors attached to the Ministry of Health, and any other person that the minister may deem fit. So we will have the numbers in terms of the actual persons on the ground who can police the provisions of the regulations.
It is felt that the introduction and implementation of the new regulations will play an integral role in the efforts to return the city to its former glory and bring about a change in behavior across the country as a whole.
I believe these regulations are a significant achievement not only for the Environmental Protection Agency and by extension the Ministry of Natural Resources, but it's a great achievement for environmental protection and management in Guyana as a whole. Because for the first time in this country, we have legislation that has been enacted specifically to address litter issues from a holistic perspective in terms of its substantive coverage and the penalties under the legislation. So from that standpoint, I think it's a fantastic achievement for the country.
Among the actions being taken in the first phase of the implementation of the new regulations is the engagement of the business community in Georgetown.
This first aspects of testing it out is to basically reach out to the businesses, sensitizing them about the litter prevention regulations and what are their expected responsibilities, and basically providing the education and awareness, providing documentation, the pamphlets and what have you. And all in all, not to go aggressively to say right away, so we're going to charge you. We want them to let them become aware of what their responsibilities are before we give them the full arm of the law.
As business operators, we need to be responsible.
Stop littering. Do the right thing.
The first course of action in dealing with businesses guilty of littering is to issue a cleanup order, which is intended to have the operators of the business in question take immediate steps to remove the garbage dumped illegally.
They're also looking at key areas where there are significant illegal dumping, and they would basically be issuing what you call cleanup orders or litter removal orders. So, for example, they notice a pile of garbage in front X and Y store. They will approach the owners, talk to them, and issue them in a very nice manner, in a cordial manner, ask them to assist in cleaning it up. So that is what they're doing actually for the first month. They're going street by street across Regent Street, Church Street, Robb Street, Starbrook Market, Border Market, those areas which are basically the litter hotspots in Georgetown. And we're not going alone, as I said, we're going in partnership with the City Constabulary.
One of the powers of the litter wardens, as stated for under the regulations, is that the wardens can issue what's termed as cleanup orders. So if a warden in his investigations, if he discovers that a particular premises is kept in such a state that it creates an eyesore to the overall surroundings, or it places a danger to the health of humans, then the warden can issue what's called a cleanup order, mandating the person who is responsible for creating the litter to clean up the premises within a specified period. And if that time frame is not complied with, then they would be liable to a fine of $30,000 under the regulations.
In instances where a business is unable to take the necessary steps to clean up garbage dumped illegally, authorities intend to step in and take the lead.
Conversely, the agency also has the mandate under the Act through the litter wardens to, if the circumstances warrant it, to actually undertake the cleanup action with us actually bearing the cost. And then once the surroundings are adequately cleaned up, then the agency would issue the cost of the cleanup to the business persons for them to bear.
Authorities have also been meeting with the members of the business community to raise awareness and enlist their support for the implementation of the new anti-littering measures.
We are engaging the private sector, the businesses. We can start out by saying, okay, do not drop your litter, do not dump your litter. Everybody has to put their hands to the plow. So we're providing incentives for them to comply and to work along with us. For example, we're going to work Ministry of Local Government. They are working along with us. We're engaging them right now in discussions. And the idea is for them to provide receptacles in key areas along the city. So these receptacles will be publicized, their location will be publicized, so that the businesses now can know where these are. And instead of taking their litter and their garbage and put it anywhere, they can go and put it into these receptacles. We're also working along with the local government and the mayor and city council to encourage the private contractors, the CVONs and the other private contractors that they have, and they will ensure that these receptacles are picked up on a regular basis. And they're, maybe if it's 3 times a week or whatever, and then the private sector will have to. We're encouraging them for them to come up with the additional time. Government alone can't do everything, but so if the government provide 3 days, they can come up with additional 2 or 3 days. And what we're working on is what we call community pride programs. So we're going to have one-on-one discussion with key business people, and encouraging them to come together and form what is probably a Guyanese Businesses Against Litter, something to that effect. So they are meeting, organizing themselves, and working to ensure that the communities that they operate are kept clean and managed.
The new regulations make it an offense not only to litter directly, but also to cause another person to litter.
These new regulations will be more effective than the existing regulations that deal with litter-related issues in two ways. First of all, in terms of the substantive provisions, the depth of coverage of the actual regulations is vast. So, for instance, it's wide, the regulations, the provisions are wide enough in its scope to cover not only persons who physically deposit litter, but also it covers persons who, through their conduct or their words, they actually cause litter to be deposited. So, for instance, you can be held liable under the regulations regardless of if you've actually physically deposited litter. That will cover situations, for instance, with business persons who may give their refuse to vagrants to be deposited, and then they offer them no guidance in terms of how they should appropriately discard of the litter. In a situation like this, the business person can actually be held liable by that conduct. Under the existing legislation used by the Mayor and City Council, the council did not have the authority to go after the business person in that situation. They had to go after the vagrant. And what we find in most situations is that the vagrants are unwilling to actually give up the names of the business persons that they're working for, because that's their livelihood.
Under the new regulations, persons found guilty of depositing litter in a public place will be required to pay a significant fine.
It is an offense for a person to deposit litter in a public place. Now, there are three key elements in that offense. There's deposit, litter, and a public place. In terms of deposit means to either physically discard or to cause litter to be discarded. Litter is described very widely under the Act. It encompasses solid matter, liquid, a combination of both, dirt, grass, soil. Anything can be considered litter under the regulations. And also, a public place means any expanse of land that is not privately owned. So any person who is found guilty of depositing litter in a public place is liable upon conviction to pay a fine of $50,000. In the case of a corporation, that fine is doubled to $100,000. Now, related to that offense, if a person is in a vehicle that's traveling along a roadway and the person deposits litter from that vehicle, then that person would be liable under that particular offense. And if it's a situation where there are a number of persons in the vehicle and it can't be ascertained exactly who is the person that's responsible for depositing that litter, then in that situation, the driver of the vehicle would be held liable. But that is only in the case of private vehicles.
I always encourage the passengers not to throw garbage out of the window.
Stop littering. Do the right thing.
Passengers in minibuses, taxis, and any other form of public transportation who are guilty of littering will be held accountable.
For public transportation, the person who is actually responsible for physically depositing the litter will be held liable.
Providers of public transportation will now be required to provide receptacles for passengers to deposit litter.
The regulations mandate that the owners of public transportation or any transportation for hire, they must provide a receptacle for litter to be deposited. A receptacle is basically a container. It can be a plastic bag. Any suitable vessel by which the passengers of the vehicle can deposit the litter. And if this receptacle is not provided, then the owner of the vehicle can be liable upon conviction to the payment of a fine of $15,000.
Consultations with the various stakeholders have been successful so far, and the Environmental Protection Agency believes that the public as well as the business community will offer their full support for the implementation of the new regulations.
We have had very, very good responses. People have recognized that the situation that we're faced with our litter issue in Guyana, across Guyana, and they very much welcome the effect. In fact, the offences and the fines are what they consider as the biggest deterrent. So they said that previously they didn't have that high fines; anybody could have, just ignore it. So the fines and the fact that we're having litter wardens who are actually going to be, trained in not just putting you out there, but trained in forensics, so they can identify and link you back to whatever litter has been dumped and stuff like that. So they very much welcome the new litter prevention regulation and the approach that we're taking, the partnership approach of ensuring that we're working with businesses, we're working with the private sector, we're working with the other government agencies as well. And in fact, along the road, when our officers were there last week, members of the public came up to them and said, this is a very good thing and this is what we needed, and they're very much in support of it.
The agency has been in consultation with a number of stakeholders, primarily the Mayor and City Council. And in this regard, I would like to give special notice to the Town Clerk, Ms. Suba, and also the Director of Solid Waste Management at the Council, Mr. Walter Narine. They have pledged their full support in terms of developing institutional support and building capacity framework in terms of implementing the regulations.
The rapidly deteriorating garbage situation in the city and other parts of the country has made it necessary for authorities to introduce more stringent measures, which it is hoped will help deter persons from littering.
In my opinion, we need something draconian right now. Our city, our country is heading down a very, very wrong path. And if we don't take these enforcement measures at this point in time, and which is the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment is pushing, we will end up, I don't know what, covered in garbage. And we need to change it. And just get me clear, we're not just enforcement. We want to bring people into compliance. So we're providing you the assistance to comply. The information, the support, we are here, the EPA is here to engage and coordinate any discussions that we may have with various different stakeholders. That is our role. And if and only if you don't comply, then the enforcement aspect in terms of the regulations, the fines, and if it necessitates imprisonment, we'll go after it.
Litter has become, in my opinion, we have reached a crisis state in the country. The purpose of these regulations is really to be used as a standard for deterring littering in the city. Not just in the city, but in the country as a whole. We must start somewhere. These fines may seem severe to some, but in terms of us going out into the streets and the PR work and the groundwork that we've been doing leading up to these regulations, the response that we have gotten from the citizens on the ground has been very encouraging. Many persons are tired of the condition that the city is in, and they're welcoming these regulations and the fines accompanying these regulations.
In addition to the business community, persons littering on private property will also face stiff penalties.
The Act makes specific provision for an individual who litters on private premises. In this situation, any person who's found guilty of littering on premises belonging to another person, whether it be on the parapet, on the bridge, or on any vicinity on the private property, that person would be liable on conviction to a fine of $30,000.
With the mobilization of additional human resources to carefully monitor and stop those littering, authorities are confident that these new regulations will be effectively implemented.
We now have physical persons on the ground to man the provisions of the Act. Previously, we did not have these persons. So from that standpoint, offenses created under the Act can be adequately policed and they can be adequately enforced. So in the past, where we did not have that presence on the ground, we now do. So persons who are guilty of creating those offenses are more, they're better brought before the courts. They're brought before the courts in a speedier form.
Looking forward, the Ministry of Natural Resources and the Environment will be working with other agencies and the private sector to establish waste recycling facilities in the country.
They're looking at potential interest to set up a recycling plant in Guyana, and a very huge recycling plant. And that plant will actually accommodate all sorts of garbage, including waste from industry. We're looking at things like the paddy husks and so on, the poultry waste, manure and stuff like that, in addition to the bottles and the plastics and what's not. And converting these into products that they themselves can actually, sell back in the air. And there are also technologies that are aware, and the EPA is looking at that as well. When we're going out to our regular industrial compliance visits and so on, we're encouraging them to adopt green technologies. So, for example, a swine rearing operation can install a simple biodigester that collects the waste, and that is formed methane, and it can be burned and used as an alternative energy source. I mean, what we're doing is just now providing the opportunities for people to start thinking along these lines, and hopefully we can work out some form of fashion to encourage them to adopt those technologies.
The promotion of recycling initiatives has been something that the agency and the ministry has been looking into for a number of years. In terms of actually beginning to move in that direction, it needs to be adequately monitored. So to that effect, I understand that legislation is currently we're at the initial stages in terms of developing legislation that would promote those recycling initiatives and also ensure that they're conducted in a manner that's consistent with environmental principles and that's consistent with sustainability principles.
Authorities believe that beyond the prospect of having to pay a fine or face jail time, keeping the environment clean is a responsibility which all Guyanese should take very seriously and willingly take steps to stop littering.
No one likes to reside in dirty surroundings. As I've mentioned before, the litter situation has reached crisis levels, particularly in Georgetown. And we've already started to see some of these effects in terms of drains being clogged up, rainfall for just a few hours, and the cities are flooded. So in terms of keeping the environment clean, it's not just a matter of us not littering and persons being brought before the purview of the courts. It's a matter of comfort, it's a matter of safety, and most importantly, it's a matter of universal health for all citizens.
My call to the business people and the general public is basically to join with us. We're going to provide you with the content of the regulations. Just support us, partner with us. If you need any assistance, feel free to contact the agency, contact the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, and let's work together. It's a partnership. And as I started out by saying, let's put our hands to the plow. And we can put our hands to the plow, I believe we can make a change with a serious scourge of garbage in Guyana.
On Thursday, March 6, Minister of Natural Resources and the Environment, Robert Prasad, inspected ongoing construction work for Guyana's first petting zoo and other enhancement works being carried out within the botanical gardens and the national parks.
Welcome to Guyana, the gateway to South America. A pristine haven of abundant natural resources. We are a nation born in sacrifice and enriched by our togetherness. When we play, we celebrate every effort. When we celebrate, we salute more than success. We exude our right to move forward.
You've been watching El Dorado Shines. Do join us again next week for another program. Until then, remember, we all have a role to play in protecting the environment.